Hey guys, and welcome to another sword sharpening segment brought to you by the School of Faith and Thought. I'm Susie, and today we're going to be reading from the book of Genesis, and we're going to read the very first chapter of Genesis, Genesis chapter 1. Now, this has been an exciting journey for me, looking into Genesis, looking into chapter 1, and really unpacking it a little bit, having a look at it back in its original text in the Hebrew, and trying to understand really what Genesis 1 is trying to explain to us. And I tell you what, guys, it is deep. It is so much deeper than anything that I could even cover today. And I don't believe that me as a person is ever going to get sick of reading and studying Genesis 1 because it is just so incredibly interesting, so incredibly detailed. And the more that you look at it, the more that you see. So just know that what I'm going to give you guys today is really just scratching the surface of what there is to be found in Genesis 1. And I encourage each and every single one of you to go back. If you've never read it, read it right now. Read the first chapter of the first book of the Bible. And if you have read it, go back and read it again and read it again and read it again. Read it with a fine-tooth comb. Read it with the Spirit of the Lord guiding you and leading you and helping you to really understand and dissect it. What I really want to begin with is the book of Genesis as a whole. So most people attribute the writing of the book of Genesis to Moses. They attribute the first 5 books of the Bible, collectively called the Torah. They attribute those first 5 books to Moses. And we only really meet Moses a lot later on in the series. And he plays a pivotal role in the book of Exodus, for example. So we're not going to meet Moses right off the bat, but it is considered that Moses wrote this particular book of the Bible, and it was given to him through divine inspiration, because he used to spend a lot of time with the Lord, as we'll see as we read through and we get to know who he is a bit later on. But that's the background story, is that we think Moses wrote it. No one really knows who wrote Genesis, right? No one really knows. And I think that it's interesting to note that if it was a person writing it, rather than through divine inspiration by the Lord, but just like a person that decided, well, now I'm going to write this book and I'm going to call it Genesis, I would find it very difficult to believe that a person would want to write this out of their own inspiration, because a God that a person thinks of is a God that we can understand. And honestly, there's a lot of questions that are left unanswered in many ways about the character of God and how God exactly does things. And so, us as people, we like to understand things, especially if we're going to write something down and leave a record of it. We like to understand it. So I personally would find it very difficult to think that someone would write this book and just make it up out of their imagination, because they've left too many details out to chance for that to really be the case. So without further ado, let's get into it. Let's read Genesis chapter 1. And I really just want to set a little bit of a scene for you guys as well. Before we get into it, I really want to set the scene of what we're getting into. Now, remember, this is an old text. This is an ancient text. This is not something that was written in recent times. And because of that, it's important for us to understand the time period in which this book was written, because it helps us to understand the text in a deeper way. At the time period where this text was written, there was a lot of other texts that come out around the same time about, how the earth was created, how time began. The thing that really set Genesis apart from the others is that Genesis really focused on one God, being the God, the creator, the ruler over all. A lot of the other religions of the time had these concepts that, like, the sun was a god and the moon was a god, and there was a god of the sea and there was a god of the earth and there was this god and that god. But Genesis really makes it clear that there is one God, one creator over all. And so everything that we see in the physical world, other people, animals, fish, birds, trees, food, the sky, everything else, everything that we see, it really came directly from the hand of God. God created everything. And so he is the sole God, the sole ruler, the sole creator over our entire, world as we know it today. The other thing is that the ancient people seem to be a lot more concerned with what and when something gained a function and what function it gained, as opposed to how that thing actually came into being. Us today are a lot more centered on, material creation. how exactly something was created. Did it come from a big bang, or did it come from this, or did it come from that? And I just like to interject there and say that even if you believe in the Big Bang Theory or parts of the Big Bang Theory, that is not alone enough to say there is no God, because you still can't say God didn't create the Big Bang. Okay, so I'm just going to put that out there right away. But aside from that, we like to think of how something was materially made, how it literally came into being. The ancient people were more concerned with when something received its purpose. So it was more about bringing order, creating order out of chaos. When did the chaos become ordered? When did the things receive a purpose? And so without further ado, I'm going to read Genesis 1:1. I would love to say it's the first sentence of the Bible, but I'm not. And there's a reason for that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But it is certainly the first verse of the Bible. And the first verse of the Bible reads like this: In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, that first three little words, in the beginning, when we hear that, we think of there having been a definite beginning point in time, a definite beginning point in time. Now, those three words together, though, in Hebrew was the word Bereshit. And there is so much controversy around this word Bereshit, you guys, so let's unpack it a little bit. There's just so much to say about this word. Some people have taken the word Bereshit and seen that in it is contained God's entire plan for the salvation of mankind. What we see here is when we read the Hebrew word. Now, Hebrew was read from left to right. We read from right to left. Hebrew was read from left to right. And when we look at the symbols that make up the word Bereshit, it is the symbol Beit, Resh, Aleph, Shin, Yud, Te. And when we put all of this together in different variations, and without getting a little bit too crazy on you guys, it ends up forming a sentence that reads, "The Son of God, crowned with thorns upon his head on a tree, was the gift of the covenant." Which is quite incredible, right? Because when we read that, as someone who has read the New Testament, as someone who has come to know Jesus, we understand that that in itself, the word Bereshit in itself, in that sense, when you unpack it like that, can become a prophecy of Jesus Christ. And so we see Jesus Christ, the plan for salvation, revealed in the very first word of the Bible. That's incredible. And we do that with how they've done it is just with different variations of those letters. So you take the word bait to begin, and that bait being, God. And then you would take Beit and Resh together, which they make another word, and that word makes the word son, and so on and so forth. And so they've combined different variations of it, like the first word, and then the first word with the second, and then the second with the third, and the third with the fourth, and so on. And they've created this sentence. It all comes together to read, "The Son of God, crowned with thorns upon his head on a tree, is a gift of the covenant." That is incredible. Okay. But there's another way that Bereshit can be interpreted, and that is as being the word when. And if we rephrase the first verse of the Bible with the word when, instead of the term in the beginning, we get a dependent clause. What that means is that this sentence when is dependent on the next sentence. Let me read it to you so you can understand. When God created the heavens and the earth is dependent on something. It says the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. So rather than saying in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, we get this idea that God came to this darkness. God came to this water, this desolate place, which, we would think of as a chaos. The ancients would think of as a chaos. He came to this chaos when he decided to get creative, when he decided to give order. See, that word for create is bara in the Hebrew. And bara can also mean to give a purpose to. It doesn't necessarily mean creating something from scratch. And we see this in Psalm 51. We see this sentence that says, "Create in me a clean heart," as in bara in me a clean heart. It's not a literal clean heart that the psalmist David is asking for. It's a new function to his existing heart. So this is what we see. We see bara, we see create, we see God coming to a chaos, and he's about to give a new function to the things that he's coming to. He's going to give a new function to the face of the deep and a new function to the darkness. So as you can see, there's so much that goes into even just the first 1 and 2 verses of Genesis 1. But these things that I'm going to note to you guys today are really the things that I found the most interesting. So if I'm going to read to you now Genesis 1, verse 1 and 2, and then we can talk about it again. I'm going to read it as it's written here in the New King James Version, but keep in mind what I have just revealed to you guys in the sense of it maybe being the word when and being a dependent clause, and in the sense of it having revealed Jesus already. From the very first word of the Bible, we've already established that Jesus Christ is going to come wearing a crown of thorns, and he's going to be the fulfillment of the covenant of the promises of the Lord. It's incredible. All right. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, meaning it had no purpose. And darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Right there, we've already established the Trinity. We've already established God the Father, Jesus Christ, and the Spirit of God. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. Let's continue. Verse 3. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day. Now we see him in these verses 3 to verse 5, we see God giving a purpose to the darkness as being night and a purpose to the light as being day. A lot of people can't understand why we're having the first day, God is making dark and light, and then later on in day 4, we see that he's actually putting the sun, the moon, and the stars. People get a little bit confused about this and they go, well, how is he putting the sun, the moon, and the stars in place on day 4, but there's already light on day 1? And it's very simple, guys. It's because they're two different kinds of light. Think it as being like daylight and sunlight. They're not the same thing. Daylight appears, say, about an hour, sometimes 2 hours before the sun actually begins to rise. In ancient times, people really did understand that the sun was more a source of heat than a source of direct light. The daylight would begin before the heat of the day would come in from the sun. And it's the same thing. We see the sun setting, we see a darkness coming in before we see the moon coming up into the sky. So the moon was separately associated to the night time, the darkness. And again, the sun was separately associated to the daylight. They were two separate things and they had separate functions. And we do see this in the fact that there's actually different Hebrew words used for the term light in day 1 as opposed to the lights that come into the sky on day 4. And that's something that you can see when you look at it into the Hebrew. We continue reading now from verse 6. It says, "Then God said, Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. Thus God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And so it was." Now that word firmament literally means expanse. And so what you might think of this being is like the sky. Because you've got the waters above, which is our clouds, and you've got the waters below, which is obviously our rivers and our sea and all those kinds of things. And in the middle of that, we've got this expanse, this firmament. But there's also a different kind of understanding of the word firmament, and it really goes deep, guys, and I would encourage anyone to look a bit deeper into it. But it's this idea that we're all enclosed in an enclosed system. Essentially. And that's so there's water here where we are, but then there's also water above that. That's really a discussion for another day. But it is interesting to note, and I just thought I would point out that that's what the word firmament can mean, is that expanse, the open area of sky between the earth and the clouds above. It says, and God called the firmament heaven. And so the evening and the morning were the second day. Now, interesting to note that the second day is the only day that God doesn't say he saw what he made and it was good. I have my own theory as to what that is, but guys, again, it's just a theory at best. We may not know the true reason of why the second day of creation wasn't good until we see God face to face. But it is worth mentioning that it is the only day on which God does not say that it is good. Continuing with verse 9. Then God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth. And the gathering together of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, now we're on day 4, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb that yields seed, and the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in itself on the earth. And it was so. The earth brought forth grass, the herb that yields seed according to its kind, and the tree that yields fruit, whose seed is in itself according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the third day. So we've been through the third day now, and we're about to come on to the fourth day. It's just interesting to note here that we're talking about the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in itself, and thinking about how that might be affected today, how our life might be affected today by the inclusivity of GM modified fruit and vegetables and things like that no longer produce its own seed. A lot of this stuff no longer produces its own seed. And we can see there that already God's perfect design and intent for our bodies to be, very organic and very pure and very natural and living off the land has already been tampered with, and we see the result of that in how many different people have allergies these days, have autoimmune diseases these days, food sensitivities and intolerances, and it just comes back to our bodies were never really designed to consume things that didn't have a seed in and of itself. And we'll get to that, towards the end as we're talking here about Genesis 1 and when we talk about what was given to the man and woman as food at the end of Genesis 1. But, it's just interesting to note that this was God's idea of what food should be. It should produce its own seed. Now we're reading from Genesis 1, verse 14 onward. It says, then God said, let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons and days and years. Again, this is the purpose assigned to the day and the purpose assigned to the night, and the luminaries, the lights. Think of these lights as things that shine down. It's more of a shining light as opposed to the complete and utter daylight that we see described in day 1. It says, and just another side note, we know that we do have incredible signs that take place in our sky. We know that we've got a star that leads us that can be a North Star. We know that we can see where the Southern Cross is to talk about where South is, that certain planets and certain types of stars and things only come out at certain times of the year, certain seasons of the year. And that ancients relied heavily upon stars and the sunlight for their time in the form of sundials and also for their calendars. If you actually take a little bit of time and just Google like ancient calendars and how they work, you'll find a lot of really interesting things there, and that a lot of them had close connotations to where different stars were at different points of the year in the sky. So that's a really interesting study to go down into as well. We're continuing here in verse 16. God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, as we understand the sun and the moon. He made the stars also, and God set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light unto earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. Moving on now into verse 19. So the evening and the morning were the 4th day. Then God said, let the waters abound with an abundance of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the face of the firmament of the heavens. So God created great sea creatures and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Now, Genesis 1:22 is a very special verse in the Bible, you guys, because it's the first time that God gives a blessing. Amen. And listen to this. God blessed them. Who? He blessed the birds and the fish. He says he blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. So the evening and the morning were the fifth day. Now, I took a little bit of time and meditated on that word blessing. I really wanted to understand what it is, this blessing that the fish and the birds receive from the Lord. And we see this blessing repeated in the coming verses. And the word for blessing is barak. Now, again, I could be saying this completely wrong. Listen, I'm not a Hebrew scholar. I'm only someone who is self-taught, who studies Hebrew in my spare time, because I really do enjoy getting a deeper understanding of the word of the Lord. And so to me, the word is barak. If I'm saying it wrong, I truly apologize. But it means this. It means to bring a gift to another while kneeling out of respect. It's this idea of God kneeling down, and having such a love and a respect towards his creation that he's giving them a gift. And the extended meaning of the word can also mean to give something of value to another. So this blessing that God gave them was to be fruitful and to multiply, to go out and to reproduce after their own kind. What an amazing gift it is that the Lord gave to all the birds, to all the fish, to all the animals, and even to us people, to be able to recreate other like beings that are in our image, in a sense. It's quite an incredible and a unique thing, and it just goes to show that God is the one who enables new life to come into the world, and he wants that. He wants new life to come into the world. He wants us to go out and to populate the earth and to spread out and to really enjoy everything that he has created. And he enjoys taking care of everything and everyone that he has created. And to him, it's a blessing. It's a blessing to be able to see us reproduce and to see the birds having babies and the fish having babies. And there is just something beautiful about seeing baby animals and about seeing baby human beings. There's just something beautiful about it. There always has been. And I think that it's because when we're seeing these tiny little things that are so adorable and so cute and so helpless, we also are seeing the direct physical view of the blessing of the Lord right from the beginning in the book of Genesis. We're continuing on now to verse 24. It says, then God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature according to its kind, cattle and creeping things and beasts of the earth, each according to its kind. And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Now we're on day 6. And so the first part of day 6, God has taken to really create like little bugs, cattle and wild animals, all of the animals that walk on the earth. This is now the second part of day 6, and we're in verse 26. It says, then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Now, if this all sounds a little bit confusing, don't you worry. We're going to unpack. first of all, what we see in the word image is to be like in action. That's what that word means, to be like in action. So it's not necessarily a physical image. And I guess this is where people do get confused, because male and female, he created them. Well, how can you create a male and a female in your image? You know, what does that really say about the gender of God? And I think when we're asking that kind of question, we're missing the entire point of this text. Again, we need to look at it as the ancient people who wrote this and who would have read this and studied this and understood it through their lens. We need to look at it the way that they would have understood it as well, not just the way that we do today with a modernized mind. And so when they thought of something as being the image of something, they thought of it as being like it in nature, like it in character. And we see this reflected in the New Testament as well. In fact, very recently, I did another Word of God Bible reading about Matthew chapter 5, and it was in Matthew chapter 5, part 1, and I talked about how being the son of someone meant that you had the characteristics of that person. And it's the same thing that we see here. Being made in the image of God is meaning having the characteristics, the same kinds of actions as God would have had. And it doesn't just say to be made in the image of, it says, but in the likeness of. Now, that word likeness has the meaning to be a shadow of, as though we are walking behind the Lord and imitating his moves. Amen. Like we are his shadow. He's doing something and we're doing the same thing. So we get the feel that it's not necessarily a physical image and a physical likeness. It's more of what's on the inside. Our heart and our mind is created to be in the image and the likeness of God, so that what we are doing is exactly the same as what God would have done in that same situation. Now, there's another sentence here where we talk about that the man and the woman were to have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and of the cattle, and these kinds of things. Now, that word dominion over, we kind of think of it as ruling over, you know, having a dominion, being dominating over. But I'm here to tell you that that's not necessarily what that word means. It's less in the sense of a ruler and more in the sense of a leader. And so we need to think of it like that man was to lead the animals where they must go. There was to be this symbiotic relationship where man was to lead and guide the animals, but the animals were also kind of to lead and guide the man. That's what it's actually supposed to be implying there. It's not so much the man is there to dominate and rule over everything else. He is, in a sense, he's the head, like the leader over them all. But it's not in the sense of, you know, having to really take control over them. It's in the sense of he's responsible for taking care of these creatures and making sure that they're doing okay. And also, as he's in the process of this, he's a leader. So he's developing a relationship with these animals, these fish and these birds. And it's this relationship that they have where they know that he's over them, but it's in a loving way. It's not in a dominating kind of a sense. So we know now from this portion of scripture that God created both men and women to be in his likeness, to share in his characteristics. From verse 28, it says, then God blessed them. Here's the second blessing. Then God blessed them, and God said to them the same thing that he said to the fish and the birds. He said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. So God is repeating this idea. He's repeating their purpose, and he's saying, this is your purpose, is to lead and take care of these beings. And I've made you in my image, in my likeness, so that you can do it in the way that I would have done it. You know, and so the people are really imitating God in their ability to care for these other animals, which really just goes to show that the nature of God, if people are made in the image of God, and God is saying you're to go out and lead these beings. You're above them, yes, but you're leading them in a loving manner, and you're learning from them. You're guiding them into the right direction. And we're made in the image of God. Then that means that God's nature is to lead us as well and to guide us lovingly in the right direction. So it's actually quite beautiful in that sense. We continue here in verse 29. And God said, See, I have given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed. To you it shall be for food. Also to every beast of the earth, to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, in which there is life, I have given every green herb for food. And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made. I mean, everything. So this must include day 2. Remember, on day 2, God didn't say that it was good, but this says everything that he had made, including day 2's creations, and it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the 6th day. And this is where we end Genesis 1. I think it's just important to note that at this point in time, the people and the animals have all been given mainly their fruit and their herbs to eat. There doesn't seem to be any implication towards, any animals eating other animals. There doesn't seem to be any implication, at least what I can gather from the text, that there was even such a thing as death. I know this is an arguable point. I have watched things by theologians who do debate this and say that, death existed. But for me personally, I don't see that death existed in Genesis 1. I see a beautiful world. I see a world where everybody worked together. I see a world where everything had a function. Everything was given a function. Nothing that God made was purposeless. He had a purpose for everything. He came to this utter empty chaos at a point in time, because I do believe that in the beginning reads as when. So when God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and there was darkness on the face of the deep. So I do believe that there was this time period where there was absolutely nothing. And then, God came to this nothing and he said, I'm going to give it purpose. God came to the chaos and he said, I'm going to do something with this. And he did it for his own good pleasure. He did it because he wanted to. He did it because he took pleasure in doing it, and because to him it was a good thing to do. It was a good thing to come to something that was in chaos and to restore it and to give it a proper order. And so I feel that's the same with our lives today, guys. God comes to our life. We can be in utter chaos. We can have done all sorts of crazy things. Whether you're an atheist or not, whether you believe in God or not, doesn't really matter. God can come into the midst of your situation as you are, and he can take that chaos and he can just speak a word of life, speak a word of joy, speak a word of light, and he can, disperse the darkness. He can give a new purpose and a new meaning to your life, the same way that he did to the chaos in Genesis 1. So what an encouraging word it is. And I just also want to note that the ending of Genesis 1, we see that everything was very good. Everything was very good by God's standards, which God's standard is the ultimate standard by which we should measure everything. So if God said it was very good, it was very good. There was nothing lacking in that world. There was nothing evil. There was nothing bad there. Everything that he made at this point in time was perfect and complete, lacking nothing. Well, guys, I hope this has been a blessing unto you. I encourage all of you to open up your Bible, study it for yourself, read it for yourself, pray about it, ask the Lord to give you insight into these things. We are going to next be looking at Genesis chapter 2, in which really we're going to zone in on a couple of aspects of the creation of God, but I don't want to jump the gun too much. I hope that you guys have a very blessed week ahead. Thank you so much for listening to this message, and until next time, God bless.